Magandang araw, Podmates. Howie Severino muli with another accomplished Filipino. At 29, he's an ambitious young man with ambitious plans to make solar energy replace coal in the Philippines. Leandro o Lean Leviste, the CEO of Solar Philippines. Magandang araw sa iyo, Lean.
Ay, magandang araw po sa inyo din.
Leon, you are indeed young, but you're not a new kid on the block. No, you've been talking up solar energy in the Philippines for years now, even sometimes striking a Nostradamus tone, no, in making prophecies. One of which is that solar will soon be cheaper than coal in the Philippines. Kumusta na yung prophecy na yan?
Well, that's a very good thing you point out, that when we started saying that in 2016, the cost of solar power was around 6 pesos per kilowatt hour, and with batteries, way higher than that. And the cost of coal was around 4 pesos per kilowatt hour in the Philippines. Now the cost of solar without batteries is around 3 pesos per kilowatt hour, and with batteries, around 5 pesos per kilowatt hour, while the cost of coal is 8 pesos per kilowatt hour. So there is no longer any debate that solar and renewable energy in general is cheaper than coal.
Okay, give us a real world context for that. No, that's the price at which big companies will buy energy, right? Paano to nararamdaman ng ordinaryong tao? Itong mas mura na ngayon ng solar kaysa coal.
The average generation cost in the Philippines purchased by utilities like Meralco is now over 6 pesos per kilowatt hour. And the cost of new coal developments and gas developments is even higher than that. The cost of solar is, as we noted earlier, 4 or so pesos per kilowatt hour if you make certain assumptions in blending with batteries. And so if the cost of solar is applied for the entire generation cost, then the entire country can save 20 or so percent on their monthly electric bills. The utilities would actually like to make those savings now too, but the problem is that we are already tied to the existing coal and gas power plants of the Philippines, but that hopefully with the phasing out of old plants and phasing in of new renewable energy plants, there can be this significant, at least 20% savings in everyone's monthly electric bills over time.
Okay, well, it's kind of a race, no? Because you're building solar farms, and obviously, companies want to buy cheaper energy, and solar, as you say, fulfilled your prophecy of becoming cheaper than coal. However, sabi mo nga, we're locked into this coal energy path, no? These new coal power plants have 20-year contracts. They're very expensive to build. How easy will it be, no? To compete with coal kung nandiyan na siya, no? I mean, it's a reliable energy source. It's already there. Investors believe in it.
Before, the problem was convincing the distribution utilities like Meralco and the generators who will also make the landscape for the power supply that solar and renewables is better than coal and gas. But especially with the very high current prices for fossil fuel, everyone is now convinced. And that's very, very good news compared to what we all knew years ago. And the problem is no longer convincing these decision makers, or in other words, creating demand. The problem is delivering the supply of solar and renewable energy. Because even if the country has demand for, let's say, 10,000 megawatts of solar energy today, there is not more than 1,500 megawatts or so operating, and we can't just produce this additional capacity overnight. We, as a company, have been developing large capacities of solar projects in the past. And I think our regret is that we were not able to do so fast enough to take advantage of the current market conditions, but that when we can deliver on these projects, then this significant demand can be met and the power prices in the Philippines will decrease. And that's why we're not seeing the need to advocate for new policies or convincing utilities to procure solar now as the critical path. It's really just the companies that deliver the solar themselves getting their act together to bring this new capacity online as soon as possible.
You know, for the longest time, pag sinabing solar energy, we were talking about a so-called alternative that was off-grid, no? But you've been shifting the conversation to the grid, no? Solar power can be sold to the grid. It is a grid form of energy now. It's not just for homes that are far away from the grid, or for ecologically correct families or couples who want to put solar panels and wean themselves from fossil fuels. No, so you've been very busy trying to mainstream solar energy in the national conversation. No? And you're saying that it's no longer a missionary product. No, it can compete economically. It doesn't need any special treatment from the government. No, kasi previously it was subsidized, di ba? Heavily subsidized. Now it's no longer subsidized, and you're saying that even without subsidies, it competes very well with fossil fuels. No, so when did this shift start happening?
Yes, thank you for bringing it to the numbers, because energy is really just a matter of these numbers, which will dictate the capacity rollouts that we've been discussing. Where when I began the business, there was a feed-in tariff subsidy of around 8 pesos 69 centavos per kilowatt hour for projects that would be delivered by March of 2016. And then I mentioned earlier that after the feed-in tariff, the price was around 6 pesos for new capacity, when coal was around 4. And around that time, people would think, as you said, that solar is for off-grid application, or if on-grid, then subsidized by government. But because of the decrease in the price of the solar panels and other equipment, it has gone below 4 pesos, even 3 pesos per kilowatt hour, when the cost of the power on the grid from 4 has actually gone up over 6. The key for the mainstreaming of solar is to go beyond the, as you noted, on-site application into the wholesale generation supply. Because as much as many would like independence from the grid, there's actually a very efficient setup in having large power plants with distributors who can make the energy available when you're at home, and then not need to be tapped when you're not at home. So the vast majority of power consumption will go through the utilities. And that's why the challenge for us is now just in developing the supply of the power plants so they can meet the demand of the utilities.
In other words, the problem is not the grid. The problem is the fossil fuels that the grids are currently dependent on, right? If solar replace the fossil fuels in the grid, then it would be a win-win. Basically, would be a win-win solution.
Yes, actually, there's now agreement that if you can build solar, then it should replace the fossil fuel plants. And the problem is not even that there are these pre-existing fossil fuel plants. It's that we can't build the solar fast enough. And the key ingredient is actually the grid, in that the grid has been developed. Previously, government-owned Transco and Napocor for these big fossil fuel plants, in large part in provinces like Pangasinan and Quezon, that will deliver the power to Manila. And it takes decades to develop those very big transmission lines, while it takes only years to put up solar power plants. So we're in this transition stage to put up the necessary transmission infrastructure so the new source of power can be delivered to Manila. And fast forward to the later in life of our generation, Mr. Severino, and it's already going to be predominantly solar and wind powering Manila. But to the extent that it's only been in the last few years that this has been incorporated in the transmission planning, there is still this gap between the supply and the demand.
Your company is engaged in building solar farms, among other things, no? But mostly solar farms, no? For most people, this is not a familiar concept, no? What is a solar farm?
A solar farm is a large number of solar panels that will connect to the national grid, which then will transmit that power eventually to end consumers.
And how many have you built?
We have 2 operating solar farms and many smaller, we don't call them solar farms, but just solar installations. And we are developing a number of other solar farms. And our company is in total developing around 10,000 megawatts of solar projects that are in large part contracted to deliver power by 2025 and 2026 to utilities like Meralco or to the wholesale electricity spot market. So that's a lot of technical terms, because power industry is mostly a business to business field, where the customer facing part of it is the utility like Meralco. So again, bringing it back to its impact to consumers, like you said a while ago, the more of the power supply that comes from the source, the more that the generation cost should be this lower 4 pesos per kilowatt hour that we said a while ago.
In other words, right now, solar is providing power to a number of utilities already. But consumers who are using this power don't even know that much of it is coming from solar energy. Tama ba yun?
Yeah. Actually, if you look at the website of Meralco, they list their generation sources. The average generation charge of Meralco is maybe now 6.5 pesos per kilowatt hour. And they actually give a breakdown of each of their sources. Cheapest line in that is their other sources, where our operating solar power plant in Tarlac is supplying to Meralco at just over 3 pesos per kilowatt hour, or half of their average cost. So yes, we just pay the average cost, which is 6.5, let's say. But if solar became the largest source, then that generation cost should be 4. But that's actually I think a fact that people don't realize that they're already purchasing it, and by the rates that publishing, there's already an acknowledgement that it's half the cost of the other sources. It's been in the news recently that some of the coal and gas power suppliers of Meralco are even trying to cancel their contracts because they're saying they have to charge higher than this 6.5. So the question of cost is no longer really in doubt. The suppliers themselves are saying that even 6 pesos is too low for coal and gas.
Mhm. So at what point will consumers benefit in terms of lower electricity prices? Because every now and then I get a message saying, okay, Meralco rates are going to go up again. Since solar is now cheaper than coal and much of our power is coming from coal, then we should soon be feeling at least an economic benefit. Or, as you say, where the country and companies like yours are still not producing enough solar power.
Yes, just to give the example of our 100 megawatt Tarlac solar farm that is supplying Meralco at just over 3 pesos per kilowatt hour.
Mhm.
We spent years to develop that project and are now expanding it in nearby solar farms in Central Luzon. But our next contracts to deliver power from those are still for delivery by 2026 because we have to prepare the land, get the permits, and then particularly build the long transmission lines to deliver the power to Manila. So this is just a transition to this new energy source that was not contemplated by most years ago. But just fast forward a decade, which is a blink of an eye in the power industry, and I think you'll already see that power prices will be significantly lower because of this new source.
And these solar farms, you said they consist of thousands of solar panels, no? First, for others, it's hard to imagine. People usually just see a few solar panels on people's rooftops, no? Obviously, this takes up a lot of land, no? And we're generally a country that has a shortage of land, no? And that's why real estate prices are so high. I understand that you're buying up land in Central Luzon. Your company develops solar farms, and I think your ambition is to build not just the biggest solar farms in the Philippines, but among the largest in Asia, if not the world.
Yes, we have one project that would be a combined 4,000 megawatts in one general area that would be connected to Metro Manila through a transmission line that we are also developing. That 4,000 megawatts would be larger than, I think, the largest ones today, around 2,200 megawatts in India, maybe another 3,000 or so megawatt one that is coming up in China. And it's just because of the fact that the Philippines does not have too many good sites for solar. As you earlier pointed out, that when we have one site that we can connect to Manila, that one agglomeration can really meet the requirements in one spot. The other thing is that in other countries, there is not as much of a economic case for solar because their power generation costs are half as much as they are here. So it's, as you're pointing out, a little surprising that the Philippines can have one of the largest, if not the largest in the world. But it's a combination of the economic competitiveness in the Philippines and the scarcity of sites that are optimal for solar that make this so.
Mhm. So itong mga solar farms mo, are they on contiguous land? I mean, is it on one piece of land, or I'm trying to understand what you mean by a solar farm. Does it all have to be on one piece of land, or can they be small pieces of land with solar panels and they're just interconnected with cables and transmission lines?
More like the latter, because the
Mm.
previous scale of solar developments are, let's say, 50 to 100 megawatts, like the earlier ones that we already have operating. But if we're developing hundreds or thousands of megawatts, then it inevitably needs to be more spread out, but connected to one point from which the power is sent to Manila.
Solar farms, as the name implies, need lots of land. Isn't this leading to a new competition with agriculture, a new conflict between energy security and food security?
The regulations, as well as economic incentives, will encourage us to use land that is unproductive, because if it's productive, then it's hard to take away from its current use.
Mhm.
And I think that the other benefits of turning this land into solar will mean higher income for the local communities. And generally, the market should determine what is the best use for a given piece of land. So, in a short answer, there is, of course, attempt to minimize any productive use being displaced, and then any new use should more than compensate for that in terms of its benefits to the community.
And I understand one reason, of course, one major reason why you're building solar farms in Central Luzon and provinces that are near Mega Manila, obviously, is because Mega Manila is where the power hungry industries are mostly concentrated, no, in the Philippines. But Central Luzon and provinces like Nueva Ecija are also agricultural, traditionally agricultural provinces, no? And they have a lot of flat land, which I guess solar farms need, no? In a theoretical sense, parang may conflict, no? But you're saying that you're only using land that's not currently productive for agriculture.
Yes, because it would be hard for us to get land that is productively used. The ones that we end up using are the ones that are easily made available for sale or for lease, like in the case of our ongoing project, a former pasture land that
Mhm.
is elevated, so you can't plant productively on it. And I think when you talk to people in certain areas, they will say, "Oh yeah, yeah, maraming mga lupang hindi napapakinabangan dito." So
Mhm.
they will corroborate that generally the Philippines is land scarce, but there are pockets of land that are not productively used.
And of course, pasture land. Much of the pasture land in the Philippines is grazing land for cows, no, beef, and we know that they also contribute to climate change through methane emissions, no. So in a way, it's parang killing two birds with one stone in a
That's
solar
right.
farm.
And, I mean, admittedly, the crop that is most displaced by solar in the Philippines to date is sugar, and that also contributes to diabetes.
Okay. Now, reading up on your background, no, one thing that stands out is that you haven't finished college, no. You dropped out of Yale University, an Ivy League school, no, before your junior year, no. Many people, not just in the Philippines but around the world, would die for an Ivy League education. But obviously, you thought there was something out there for you, no, that was even more important than that. So, uh, can you take us back to that decision? Because I know that's basically what led you to where you are right now, no? But was that must have been a very difficult decision to make?
Well, it's a gradual decision in that I always planned on coming back, because presumably our work will be finished not too long from when we began. And it's now been 9 years, and there's always more to be done after all. But the specific moment that caused us to focus everything on this after having been doing it on a part-time basis was when the DOE said that there is a deadline to complete projects by March of 2016. And that was April 2014. And it was quite urgent to focus on the development of the projects to meet that. And I was lucky because if I finished college and then began this business, then I wouldn't have been able to build projects in time for this DOE March 2016 deadline. And that's a lot of what life is about, I think, being in the right place at the right time at the dawn of a new industry, that if you're not the first mover, you will miss the long-term advantage that comes from being there early.
And were you also channeling the experiences of other business leaders before you? I mean, there are others who also dropped out of college for familiar reasons, no, for similar reasons, no.
Yes, because business is really about trying to be the first. Because if, especially when you're young, you can't compete in a mature industry. You need to go to something that is still forming. And then if you're late, then you won't be able to have that advantage.
So do you have any regrets about this? Obviously not. I mean, but what are your thoughts now, 9 years later?
Well, I'd still love to finish my education after we fulfill our mission of solar in the Philippines. But the job just keeps on getting bigger and bigger when the potential market has also continued to grow. So we'll play it by ear. But I would also just like to make a general point for your audience that the Philippines particularly is full of inefficiencies, that in a parallel universe, there shouldn't have been an opportunity for a young person to put up a solar business that will have a lot of this low-hanging fruit. But there's only a few companies that are operating power plants in the Philippines, and those few companies spent many years ignoring this opportunity. And likewise, I think there should be many more opportunities like this, even in other industries, for your listeners to hopefully be able to take advantage of.
Of course, no. And when you dropped out of college, you had you have a prominent family on both sides as a safety net. Your father is a former governor of Batangas, si Tony Leviste, and your mother, of course, is currently Senator Lauren Legarda. How did they feel about your decision to leave school to go into this business?
Well, as noted, the plan was always to go back. So it's like when you're negotiating, you don't go to the end of it at this onset. You have to do it gradually. So I'm still technically young enough that I could finish my education at this point. But I think the achievement of some result in one's first ventures, of course, also helps. So we were very lucky that there was a lot of low-hanging fruit in 2014 to 2016, that if we did not venture into something that was so fertile, that go back to school right after that. But it was just very timing that there was so much opportunity at the time.
Okay. And I mentioned that your mom is Senator Lauren Legarda. No, has that helped or hindered your business and career?
Well, of course, there are realities in the Philippines that a lot of opportunities are concentrated in only a few people's periphery. And that's something that growing up I always grappled with, in terms of the country's problems, in my opinion, being the result of that system. But that I also concluded that it is the people who have these privileges that have the greatest ability to change that system. So that's why we are quite passionate about our work, because I think that it's an opportunity to make a very big impact in the country by advocating for renewable energy in the private sector.
One answer that you gave to the question of are you considering a political career is that you think you could change the world better as an entrepreneur. No, um, has that view changed? Would you still be would you still consider a political career, or do you think you're gonna stick to business?
Uh, Definitely, the answer has not changed because there are structural barriers for a lot of change to happen in our country that I think make it a lot easier to make change outside of government, and that hopefully in this lifetime that there can be a lot bigger changes to the structural barriers in this country so that bigger change can happen. But I think it's not even like, is it business or politics? It's just in some respects, any kind of change is very hard to do in the Philippines. But yes, to the extent that one wants to pursue that change, I think it is better to do it in the private sector.
Quite clear, quite laudable. Uh, Leviste, I want to thank you. No, thank you for your time. Thank you for lighting the way with solar power. Congratulations on your many achievements, and you eventually get your college degree. Maraming
Thank you.
salamat at mabuhay ka.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino Podcast, an original for GMA News and Public Affairs. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.